Two legends, two philosophies, one unforgettable encounter. At the height of martial arts history, in a world split between ancient discipline and modern rebellion, a single meeting would quietly change the future. A heavyweight karate champion, Joe Louis, a relentless innovator, Bruce Lee. And between them, a question that still echoes: what happens when tradition tries to teach revolution? The 1960s were a turning point in American martial arts. Dojos were packed with men in crisp white gis, bowing to portraits of Okinawan masters. Karate wasn't just a sport, it was a ritual, a pathway to self-mastery. And standing at the top of that world was Joe Louis, the world's greatest karate fighter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and disciplined to the core. A US Marine turned champion, trained in Okinawa, molded by the strict traditions of combat. His punches were precise, his mindset unbreakable. To many, Joe Louis was the embodiment of karate's power, raw, pure, and absolute. But even champions have questions that power alone can't answer. Across the Pacific, another storm was forming. Bruce Lee, young, fiery, impatient with limits. To him, martial arts were not sacred traditions to be preserved. They were living, breathing ideas meant to evolve. He moved with rhythm, spoke with poetry, and thought like a philosopher. His belief that no style could contain truth, that rigidity was the enemy of freedom. To the traditional world of martial arts, Bruce Lee was a heretic. To those who met him, he was a revelation. In 1967, the martial arts community in America was small but electric. Instructors, champions, movie stuntmen, philosophers. Somewhere in that current, Joe Louis met Bruce Lee. Louis had seen Lee move fast, unpredictable, like lightning without warning. And Lee, in turn, had seen in Louis something rare, a warrior forged not by theory, but by blood, sweat, and repetition. What began as mutual curiosity became an invitation. "Come train with me," Lee said. "Let's see what we can learn from each other." To the outside world, it was just a private session. A heavyweight karate champion and a rising Chinese innovator sharing ideas. But behind those closed doors, something profound took place. Imagine the room, the air thick with anticipation, the floor marked by years of practice. On one side, Joe Louis, standing tall, confident, his every movement built on the logic of karate. Control, distance, precision. On the other, Bruce Lee, barefoot, loose, unbound, watching with a quiet intensity that could cut through silence. Louis began to teach, demonstrating stances, footwork, the art of timing and delivery, the very principles that had made him champion. Lee watched carefully, nodding, absorbing, but when his turn came to move, everything changed. He didn't follow form, he flowed. He didn't demonstrate technique, he expressed motion. What Louis saw wasn't just speed, it was freedom, raw and unapologetic. Joe Louis believed in mastery through repetition. Bruce Lee believed in mastery through liberation. For Louis, the art was about perfection. For Lee, perfection was an illusion. In that quiet exchange, a spark ignited, not of rivalry, but of revelation. Imagine dialogue based on documented reflections. Joe Louis, you can't just throw away structure. Discipline is the art. Bruce Lee, discipline is the foundation, not the cage. Neither man was wrong. Louis was defending a lifetime of respect, order, and honor. Lee was reaching for the essence beneath it all, a truth untouched by boundaries. And yet, in that moment, something extraordinary happened. They listened to each other. History remembers the encounter as a simple training session. But those who knew both men tell a deeper story. That after that day, Joe Louis began to question not his strength, but the limits of his art. And Bruce Lee, too, found something in Louis, a reminder that raw power, when guided by honor, could coexist with freedom. They became close friends, training partners, confidants. Lee helped Louis break out of the traditional mold. Louis, in turn, grounded Lee's philosophy in the reality of combat. Together, they formed a bridge between East and West, between old and new. From that meeting grew an evolution. Joe Louis, once the symbol of karate's discipline, would go on to become the first heavyweight kickboxing champion, blending the lessons of Bruce Lee into his own art. And Bruce Lee, inspired by the synthesis of power and flow, refined his vision of Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. The lines between styles began to blur. Karate, kung fu, boxing, all became ingredients in a larger idea that true martial arts is not about what you memorize, but what you become. Those words didn't just echo through dojos, they reshaped an entire culture. Behind the fame and philosophy, they were still just men, passionate, stubborn, searching. Joe Louis often spoke of Bruce not as a movie star, but as a brother. He once said, "Bruce was the only man I ever met who could beat me, not in fighting, but in thinking." And Bruce Lee, in letters and interviews, spoke of Joe with respect, a man who carried tradition not as a chain, but as a sword. Together, they represented two halves of a whole, discipline and creativity, tradition and evolution, control and freedom. When Bruce Lee passed away in 1973, Joe Louis was devastated. He would later say that the world had lost not just a fighter, but a philosopher, someone who dared to ask why when everyone else was content with how. Yet even in loss, the seeds they planted had begun to bloom. Mixed martial arts, the global phenomenon that defines combat today, carries their DNA. Every time a fighter steps into a ring, blending wrestling with boxing, judo with Muay Thai, they are living proof of what began that day between Joe Louis and Bruce Lee. A fusion born from curiosity, a revolution born from respect. It's easy to romanticize history, to see legends as giants instead of people. But what truly made Joe Louis and Bruce Lee remarkable wasn't that they were invincible. It was that they were willing to change. Joe Louis, the champion who humbled himself to learn from a younger man. Bruce Lee, the innovator who found strength in structure. Their encounter wasn't a fight. It was a mirror reflecting two paths that, for one brief moment, ran together toward truth. The story of Joe Louis and Bruce Lee isn't about who was better. It's about what happens when two masters dare to learn from one another. When tradition meets revolution and both bow in respect. Together, they didn't just change martial arts. They changed the way the world understood movement, thought, and self-expression. Their philosophies still breathe in every gym, every mat, every young student trying to find meaning in motion. And maybe that's the true legacy of their meeting, that even across time, across death, their dialogue continues. Two legends, two philosophies, one unforgettable encounter that never truly ended.